We should do a podcast on carrier hotels. Okay. That's podcast number 10, carrier hotels. There we go. My name is David Liggett, and this is the Hawk Podcast number 10. Very excited to be covering something today that is actually making a very big difference in the data center world. It's not something we talk about all the time, but it is a part of real estate that is changing the industry. But this is Hawk Podcast number 10, so that's double digits, Rhett. Yes, so we've gotten to double digits with our podcast, which we're excited about that. For those of you that are new to this podcast, this is a place where we talk all things data centers. And so today we are covering carrier hotels. This came out of a comment on podcast number 9, where I made mention of the growth of the carrier hotel, market. And so we decided to cover it today. So if you're new to this industry and you don't know what that means, don't worry. We're going to explain it. If you're in the industry, you're aware. But this is, and here's the 3 things we're going to cover today regarding carrier hotels. Number 1, we're going to talk about what is a carrier hotel. Number 2, we will discuss what makes carrier hotels unique. And then number 3, we are going to dive in and talk about where are the major carrier hotels. So we're going to go through probably 5 or 6 different markets and actually hit some of the facilities that are changing the market and have been there for a while. And today's topic for me is really interesting because I got into the data center space through the real estate world. When I joined CBRE, which is a global real estate company, back in 2007, and really had never thought through much about the data center industry. That was a time too that the data center industry certainly was growing. It was maturing out of buildings that had been either previously disposed of during the .com boom or in the 2000s, and then basically retrofitted to becoming a data center facility. But in 2007, the data center business was really starting to mature, and so that's when I got into the space. But the reason that this is such an interesting topic to cover is because it's the merging of real estate and technology. And it shows how the real estate assets are supporting what's happening in the digital age, and so that's why I'm excited. So if you're from the real estate world, this will interest you. If you're from the telecom world and the technology side of things, this will certainly be of interest. But there's a number of different data center real estate asset classes that we talk about at Data Center Hawk, and we've talked about on our podcast before. Certainly, if you listen to what we talk about, you've heard us speak of the hyperscale data center market. That's one of the areas in the industry that has grown over the last 3 to 4 years. So these are, if you're thinking that, hey, this is a hyperscale facility, what these data centers typically are those built to handle the needs of large-scale users that need to grow fast and they value flexibility. And that's just one type of real estate. And we've really seen that sector grow in the last 3 to 5 years. And that's why you've seen a lot of M&A activity in the market. It's also why you've seen the amount of capital that's come in is to support the needs of those users and the facilities and the markets that those companies are in. Another type of a real estate asset class is really the traditional co-location facilities. These were facilities that are still being built today, but were really built, I would say, between 2008 and 2013 or 14. And these are traditionally buildings that serve enterprise users, Fortune 1000 companies that have requirement sizes, anywhere from 5 to 10 cabinets all the way up to 2 to 3 megawatts. And that those type of requirement sizes traditionally fit well within those more standard co-location facilities. And you hear that word enterprise demand, and that's the type of growth that takes place there. But we're not talking about those two today. We're talking about carrier hotels, which are, an emerging type of real estate that is becoming more and more important as data center users grow in their maturity and they value connectivity. And we're going to highlight that today in this podcast. So really excited about this, talking through this today. These are facilities that are handling the needs of companies and, consumers every day. So this will be a really fun podcast to kick off. And hopefully you hear me say this, but I do want to say thank you. If you have, I was talking to a couple of people last week that are consistently watching either our podcast on YouTube or listening on the other platforms that we're on. We just want to say thank you and make sure that you know that we appreciate it. And so if you want to help us, if you want to help our team, and if the content's valuable, then share it. That would be amazing. That's super helpful for us and what we're doing. And I think one of the things I'm really proud of when we started focusing on our digital content was, you really have to draw a line in the sand and commit to taking the time to develop solid content and content that is meant for, the user base that you're serving. And so I just wanted to provide an update on some of the things that we have available. One thing, you can go to our YouTube channel. I think we have over 100 video content pieces that can help you get up to speed on the data center industry. When I got into the space back in 2007, there was not a lot there to help people catch up on what's happening in the market. So we have over 100 videos there that you can watch. The unfortunate thing is I'm on most of them, so you have to put up with me, but good luck. We have a feed actually on YouTube that's called, it's our Hawk Talk segments. Now, these are just sit downs with industry, data center industry leadership. These are CEOs, chief financial officers, strategic leaders within companies that are really shaping the vision for this entire industry, not just in the U.S., but across the world. And so we'll sit down and we'll talk with them. We'll ask them questions about how they see the market growing, what's changing. And so I would just let you know, if you're wanting to understand their mindset and where they're focused from a geography perspective and why they're focused there, that's a great place to do it. And I think we've got over 25 different discussions there. This, as I mentioned before, is our 10th podcast. These are available on SoundCloud, Spotify, iTunes. These are things that I personally want to cover. So it's a good outlet for me to, talk about the data center industry and also things that are personally of interest to me. The 9th podcast that we just did that Rhett is currently working through was on the Seattle data center market and some of the dynamic changes that are taking place there. That's a really interesting, data center area of growth. And so if you're interested, that's podcast 9 that we just did. And then we also have a new segment called Ask DCH, which is where you can ask us questions about the data center industry, and then we will answer those. And then we also have a market inside track where we're updating users, or we're updating the market on why certain markets are growing, trends we've seen in different areas, how big they are, et cetera. So that's an update on our content. If you're interested or have any questions on that, reach out to us on social media and we will help you out. But this is podcast 10. We are talking about carrier hotels, and we're going to answer 3 things. What is a carrier hotel? What makes carrier hotels unique? And where are the major carrier hotels? I guarantee you there's 1 or 2 within the city that you're in. So what is a carrier hotel? These are downtown buildings traditionally, and there's a reason for that, with large concentrations of network and connectivity service providers. One of the words that you will hear when you think about carrier hotels is ecosystem, and this is where these companies, many of them have congregated so that they can serve the end user needs, when those users come there. So, these buildings are connectivity hubs, and this real estate, in my opinion, is running our technical world today. The buildings, so they're going to provide basic co-location services, so you can get power, space, and cooling at these facilities. But it's important to note that the data center infrastructure that companies choose to house in these carrier hotels is strategic in nature because they are putting it there to connect with a company in the ecosystem, a network service provider, a cloud provider. And these buildings, the carrier hotels, they have what are called meet me rooms. And all data centers traditionally have meet me rooms, but in the carrier hotels, they're I would say strategically important because this is where all these services enter the facility, and it's the access point for where the services are offered in the building. So these service providers, the ones that are coming in, want to be a part of these ecosystems because the opportunity they have to offer services to customers at these carrier hotel facilities. And so that's really what this is. I mean, these are, and we'll talk about how the actual real estate looks in some of these facilities because it's a bit different than what you're seeing being purpose-built today. But these are large buildings that have a collection of service providers in them that can be that can service the end users themselves. So here are some of the types of providers. One of the questions that you might have is like, so what kind of companies want to actually go into these data center facilities? How would you describe them? But here are some of the way those companies would be described. Some are just network carriers, so fiber providers that want to be there. They want to sell their fiber to the end users themselves. And their locations in these facilities provide access to their long-haul fiber product, their metro fiber product, and then dark fiber options as well. So, think of companies like AT&T, CenturyLink, Zayo, Verizon, etc. You will find those type of companies, all of them, in major carrier hotels across the United States and other parts of the world. So that's one group that you have that are actually coming into the carrier hotels themselves. You also have cloud providers and content delivery networks within the building. And so these companies are interested in these types of facilities, the carrier hotels, because it allows them to deliver their services better and faster. Think of Akamai, Cloudflare, Epsilon, Megaport, Packet Fabric. These are all companies that would want to be in these facilities that fall under that cloud provider or CDN network. And then you also have managed service providers. And they find these facilities attractive because they can use the services of the carrier hotels to make their end service better for their customer. And then you have colocation providers. So, they're called carrier hotels because a lot of groups are there, and you will see within major carrier hotels across the U.S., you will see a number of colocation providers located within those facilities. In fact, some of those colocation companies have gotten so big within those carrier hotels that it eventually led them to actually purchase the carrier hotel and to be the owner of the site, which makes for a very interesting situation. And I think one of the key catalysts for these carrier hotels growing in importance, growing in strategic value, growing in, really the value that they've sold for over the last 20 years was the Telecommunication Act of 1996. And so when that was signed, the purpose was really to deregulate the communications industry. And so when that happened, these buildings really became ground zero for data center providers and users to congregate for different connectivity and network services. And so that's why you hear that word ecosystem used to describe these environments. But that change in legislation allowed for a much more competitive market. And so these were the areas where that you had the greatest opportunity to do that. And so that's really what unlocked, in my opinion, this very competitive market space, and it really grew the value of these carrier hotels throughout the United States. Another just thing to note very quickly is, most cities only have one building that really, is the unofficial carrier hotel. There are some facilities, some cities across the U.S. that will have a couple that are just massively connected and have over 100, 200 service providers within the building. But most have one. Most markets have focused on one building where that's taken place. Some situations, some parts around the U.S. specifically, some cities there have been problems at a carrier hotel, and it's caused other companies to want to actually go and acquire a facility to be that next carrier hotel, and you are starting to see some of that. But you typically will see 1 to 2 of these facilities within each market, and there's reasons why that takes place. But that is really what a carrier hotel is. Again, downtown buildings with large concentrations of network and connectivity service providers. And it is really interesting to see the growth take place. So what makes carrier hotels unique? One of them is just, again, the density of the amount of providers that are actually in the facility themselves. That's one thing for sure. Typically most of these buildings were located in downtown areas because that's where a lot of infrastructure already, was. And so the facilities are actually taking advantage of, the density of location, not just from a power connectivity perspective, but also from a power standpoint. So you've got the carrier density. You have the infrastructure, located within these downtown areas. These are actually typically multi-story buildings that were not originally constructed for a carrier hotel or a data center purpose. But the characteristics of the surrounding infrastructure and facility created the opportunities for these to become data center facilities. So actually, when you walk through a lot of these different facilities, it is not what you traditionally see today when you think about how efficient and purpose-built data center facilities are today. It's a very different product. But because of the value of the ecosystem, it can kind of get away with some of the inefficiencies that might be in a multi-story building or, fiber running up an elevator bank, et cetera. As I mentioned before, typically there's multiple options. So it's you'll hear these facilities described as carrier neutral. There's usually office tenants in the building as well. So, some of these buildings might be 400,000 square feet, but some of them are all the way up to 1 to 2 million square feet. And so because of that, and because of some of the presence of other users, there are also office tenants as well. So it's kind of a very interesting mix of people that use the facility. And traditionally, so what else makes these carrier hotels unique? It's very expensive real estate, given the location, the infrastructure, the connectivity, network density in the building. All of that makes these facilities extremely valuable, and the companies that need the infrastructure space, obviously pay more than your traditional office tenant would, and so that's what makes them unique when compared to other office or even data center facilities themselves. So, we've talked about what is a carrier hotel. Again, downtown buildings with large concentrations of network and connectivity service providers. We've talked about what makes these carrier hotels unique. Obviously, the carrier density, the multi-story buildings, where they're located from a downtown perspective. And then we've also talked about, and now we're going to talk about where are the major carrier hotels. And one thing I just want to say very quickly is the business model around a lot of these carrier hotels is Crossconnect fees. So if you're not in the space, that might sound just weird. And frankly, sometimes it can be weird. But basically, what happens is, if you're basically from a fiber perspective, you need access to different networks, different providers. You'll pay some sort of fee to connect with them, and so it happens in these different areas. And some companies there's been a business model that's been very lucrative for a number of different data center operators that are out there, and service providers that are out there. But there is starting to be some competition among those types of fees, and so you're seeing some companies that are really trying to build different facilities with meet me rooms with no cross-connect fees to offer something different to the market. So that is something that you're seeing out there. I just don't think that's worth mentioning. But if you have an area that has over 250 different service providers and there's cross-connect fees going back and forth between some of those different companies, there's obviously a big opportunity there. So okay, so now I'm going to walk through where some of these different carrier hotels are, and this is really interesting. Actually, I love this. If you're in the real estate business, you'll love this too. This is just highlighting how some of these facilities have changed over time. That's a good point. Every real estate asset has a story to it, and especially from a commercial real estate side of things. But when you get into the data center business and you start thinking about how buildings are built, where they're built, why they were built there, data center facilities that have been retrofit, so they were originally something else, and now they've become data center facilities. These specifically, many of them were built kind of like, early to mid 1900s. So it's a very interesting story. They were not built to be data centers, but they have a very rich infrastructure to the facility. So it creates a very interesting story. So I'm going to highlight probably 7 or 8 different markets, and then go from there. So in Atlanta, there's a building called 56 Marietta. It's in downtown. It's a 10-story, 155,000 square foot building. It was an office building to begin with. There's over 130 network providers in that building. The building was actually purchased by Telex in the 2000s, and then when Digital Realty bought the Telex business, they gained control of the building after the Telex acquisition. But that's really the Carrier Hotel there. There's another building or two that's that has a significant or a decent amount of carriers, but that's really where things are well connected from a Atlanta perspective. In Chicago, the main Carrier Hotel is a building called 350 East Cermak. This is kind of on the southern part of downtown Chicago. It is a 1.1 million square foot building. It was built in the 1920s, but went through a conversion to be converted to a Carrier Hotels in the late 90s and has been operating like that ever since. This is actually another facility that's owned by Digital Realty. And Digital has a larger presence in Chicago as well, out in the suburbs, but everything really ties back from a connectivity perspective to 350 East Cermak, not just for Digital, but other providers as well. And so this building is really interesting because it was formerly a printing plant for the R.R. Donnelley Company. And so then obviously, so it just has a very rich, a very robust, just a very robust infrastructure. And it has over 70 different network providers today. So there's a number of different co-location operators that have a presence within that facility. As well, Digital owns it, but there's many of them that are located in that facility as well. That's traditionally how you will see that taking place. So I want to go to Boston. I'd like to go to Boston actually, but we're going to talk about Boston very quickly. So right in the heart of downtown Boston, there's a facility, and it's called 1 Summer Street. That's actually the address. And it's owned by the Markley Group. They bought it back in the late 90s and have invested heavily into the facility ever since. It's a huge facility. It's on over 900,000 feet. There's over 90 network providers on the site. It's amazing. I actually was up there a couple months ago and walked through it, and it is, it's a fantastic facility. And you just, the strategic, all these different Carrier hotels would fit into this category, but the strategic value that they serve and the companies that have, key data center infrastructure there, it's just amazing. So that's really the Carrier Hotel, not just for Boston, but, for most of the Northeast. Again, just a huge facility and really well done. So in Dallas, there's really 2 facilities. One I'm going to focus on is the Infomart. That is 1950 North Stemmons. Most people in the data center industry would obviously be aware of this building, but this is about a 1.5 million square foot building that was built in 1985 by one of the world's best real estate developers, Trammell Crow, and he really built it with the intention of it being a place where technology companies could bring their inventory and, sell it to the market. There's an actual fashion mart directly next to the Infomart. And so this was very successful for a long time. And this was really designed to do have that same approach from a technology perspective. And so it ebbed and flowed for a while, and then when the late 90s came, it started to be converted into more of a telecom hotel, and you had a number of different co-location providers that gained a presence there, most notably Equinix, and they just continued to grow and grow and grow. And then several different ownerships had the facility, but in 2018, just last year, Equinix bought the Infomart again, 1.5 million square feet for $800 million. So I think, one thing is I actually personally got a lot of calls, or a number of calls from, investors in the space. That number will wake a lot of people up just as it relates to any type of real estate asset. But I think obviously there's a very strategic asset for Equinix, but it just shows the value of what those facilities are doing today, not just for Equinix, but for other companies as well. There's also a building in downtown Dallas, actually just to the south east of that building, called 2323 Bryan, which is owned by Digital Realty, and it has carrier hotel qualities as well. It's 20 stories tall. There's a number of different carriers in that building, but both of those buildings are really the assets where the network and the carriers all want to be from a Dallas perspective. In Houston, the building that is the main carrier hotel in downtown is an 800,000 square foot building called 1301 Fannin. And again, this is in downtown, was not originally built to be a data center facility, but over time, a number of different co-location operators are in that facility. This is interesting. The building in 2007 was purchased by Griffin Partners for approximately $115 million. And it was sold to its current owner Neutrality in 2015 for over $200 million. So, again, this is most of these assets are in already highly priced real estate areas. But you put the cash flow of these companies that are within there, and then just the assets that the facilities have, creates some very highly priced real estate. In Los Angeles, there is a building at 624 South Grand Avenue called One Wilshire. It's actually, you'll see it. It's written on the side of the building. And again, it's right in downtown, 650,000 square feet. The building was bought by Heinz in 2007 for $287 million. And then Heinz sold the building to GI Partners in 2014 for $437 million. So at the time, that was the most expensive purchase of any downtown building in Los Angeles. And, I think just what that highlights, obviously, is the real estate market growing, but, just the value of that real estate. The largest tenant in the building today is CoreSite, who's a publicly traded data center provider, and they, basically one of their parent companies 20 years ago owned the property for a period of time, so they took a pretty large footprint in that building and have just been, continuing to grow. But that building has, from a network density, is probably one of the most connected buildings on the west coast of the United States. It is just a massive building, and the connectivity there is next level. In New York, there's a building called 60 Hudson. So actually, this is located in Lower Manhattan, and this was the old Western Union building. In 1928, it was built, and it's a 700,000 square foot facility. There is it is just right in the middle of, just a very densely infrastructure robust area, and so it's one of the carrier hotels there. The other carrier hotel in kind of the downtown New York area is 111 8th Avenue. So this building is almost 3 million square feet, and it was built in 1932. It's in the Chelsea area. And it was built in 1932 with the purpose of serving as a Union inland terminal for the railroad and shipping piers. And, I think that kind of faded. And so in like the late 90s, there's an investment company called Taconic that bought the facility. And then really, that was in 98, and began leasing to telecom companies and really started kind of ushering it into the digital age. and it was continuing to grow. And so one of the companies so there's a number of co-location companies within that facility, network providers, et cetera. One of the companies that took a very big presence there was Google. And so they bought the facility in 2010. Again, this is a 2.9 million square foot building, but they bought it in 2010 for approximately $1.9 billion. So just extremely valuable real estate. In Phoenix, there is a building, 120 East Van Buren. Digital Realty bought it in 2006 for $175 million. The building is around 175,000 square feet. There's over 35 plus providers in the building. In Seattle, 2001 6th Avenue, the Weston building, 400,000 square feet, built in 1981, 34 stories. There's only 250 carriers and network service providers in that building. So just, gosh, massively dense. And then I'll end with, so in Northern Virginia, I'm just going to end with this one facility. There's a building, DC2 on Filigree Court, that Equinix owns. So this was the original data center for Equinix in Ashburn. And I will tell you that there's a number of reasons. So Ashburn, at Northern Virginia, is the largest data center market in the world. And I would tell you that, not only there's a number of reasons that market has grown, but certainly one of them is because of this specific real estate asset. The amount of connectivity and providers that are within this facility and have chosen to locate there over a long period of time have made, this area, have made companies want to be close to this specific facility. And so if you're in Northern Virginia, if you're in Ashburn and you drive down Loudoun County Parkway, you drive down some of the streets that are, located within close proximity to that, you will see a data center area like, does not exist anywhere else. And one of the reasons is because of this building and because it was built a long time ago and the amount of connectivity that's taken place. And then there's other areas too. San Francisco, 200 Paul Street. Omaha, there's a carrier hotel growing, 1623 Farnham Street. Toronto, 151 Front Street. I mean, there's other carrier hotels in different markets, but these are really the places today where, you're seeing companies locate and continue to want to be so that they can serve the needs of data center users, both today and in the future. So that is it. Carrier hotels, a very interesting type of real estate. It is, only one that will get more valuable over time because the density in the ecosystems will grow. Density of providers in the ecosystems will grow. So again, these are buildings with large concentrations of network connectivity and service providers. They're unique in nature and they're located obviously in cities across the U.S. and cities across the world as well. So thanks for listening. This has been the podcast, Hawk Podcast number 10 on carrier hotels. If you are interested in our other content, you can check it out on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, Twitter. I'm sure there's other ones, Rhett, but I've forgotten. But we're out there. So if you're interested in our content, it should be there. But thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.